There's a game I used to play as a kid at the local library. Billiards, online. The kind of thing you do when you were 12 and it's summer and you have nothing else better to occupy your brain. And what I loved about it, what I genuinely enjoyed, was the little dotted line that appeared whenever you aimed your cue. It was this perfect geometric prediction. You could see exactly where the ball was going to go before you hit it. Every outcome was perfectly traceable, every shot explainable, and if something went wrong, it was your fault. If something went right, you could see exactly why. I didn't know it then, but I was being trained in the most dominant metaphysical worldview in the history of Western civilization. You see, the universe, as most people implicitly understand it, works exactly like that billiard table. Physical cause, physical effect, all the way down. No surprises, no magic, no meeting hiding between the molecules, just balls hitting balls forever. You see, that picture, that beautiful, clean, ruthlessly logical picture, has one massive implication that most people never sit well with. It leaves no room for purpose. Not cosmic purpose, not biological purpose, not the kind of purpose you feel when you hold your child for the first time or stare at the ocean and feel something you can't name. On the billiard ball model of reality, all of that is kind of an elaborate illusion. Neurons firing, atoms arranging, the feeling of meaning without any actual meaning behind it. Here's what I want to do in this video. I want to walk you through why I think that picture is wrong, not because of faith, not because I want it to be wrong, but because the science, and I mean the cutting edge, peer-reviewed, nobody saw this coming science, appears to be slowly dismantling it. And when you follow that dismantling picture far enough, you end up somewhere very old, somewhere ancient thinkers point to a very long time ago. So with that, let's go. To understand what's being challenged, you have to understand what the challenge is against. So let me give you the intellectual history as clearly as I can. You see, the dominant picture of reality that most educated Westerners hold, whether they know it or not, of course, goes by several names: materialism, physicalism, mechanism. The core claim, though, is quite simple. Everything that exists is physical, and everything that happens is the result of prior physical causes. Descartes gave us the body as machine, and Newton gave us the laws of motion, a cosmic rulebook hard-coded into nature that turned the universe into a giant clockwork. Darwin, years later, gave us the ultimate bottom-up explanation for life. You don't need a designer because you have selection pressure, mutation, and deep time. By the mid-20th century, when Watson and Crick unraveled the structure of DNA, the picture felt complete. Here it was, the cue ball of life itself, the molecule that explained the variation in behavior of every organism on Earth. The evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins put it most memorably: we are survival machines, robots built by our genes, blindly dancing to their music. Now, I want to be clear about something. I'm not dismissing any of this. Newton's laws work, Darwin's mechanism is real, and DNA is genuinely extraordinary. I have immense respect for what materialist science has accomplished. But there is a difference between a very good tool and a complete description of reality, and I think we've been confusing the two. So here's the question I want to press. Is bottom-up mechanical causation a full explanation of what's actually going on? Or is it a partial picture, powerful, accurate in its domain, but ultimately incomplete? To see through the cracks, let's start with something most people know about but haven't really thought through. I spent years in pharmacy school, and somewhere in the middle of it, I encountered a phenomenon that I couldn't stop thinking about: the placebo effect. You probably know the basics. Inert substances, sugar pills, saline injections, fake surgeries even, can trigger real, measurable biological healing responses. We use placebos in clinical trials precisely because they work so well that we have to control for them. A drug has to beat the placebo to pass, and many don't. How does a sugar pill heal someone? The molecule in the pill can't do it. There is, by definition, nothing pharmacologically active in a placebo. And yet, pain levels stop, depression disappears, neurochemistry changes, immune markers shift. In some studies, even measurable physiological outcomes improve: heart rate, blood pressure. concentration of endorphins in your brain. What's doing all that work? Who's doing the heavy lifting? The answer is the meaning of the pill. The patient believes they've been given medication by a doctor in a clinical setting, and that belief, that abstract, non-physical interpretation of the situation, triggers a cascade of molecular events. Higher perceived doses produce stronger effects. The doctor's manner and confidence affects the outcomes. The color of the pill matters, even the size of the capsule matters. None of this is information encoded in the chemistry of the pill, though. It's information encoded in the patient's mind, their expectations, symbolic interpretation, the narrative about what's going and what's happening to them, and that information somehow moves molecules. This should be deeply puzzling and disturbing to anyone who takes the billiard ball picture seriously, because what the placebo effect shows is that meaning, abstract, relational, non-physical meaning, has causal powers over our biology. The letters on a pill bottle carry no meaning in themselves. The meaning is read into them by a conscious interpreter, and that interpretation changes your body's chemistry. Richard Dawkins says that we dance to our DNA's music, but who decides the song that's being played? It's not the DNA, it's not the biology, it's the meaning therein. You see, the placebo effect was my first serious clue that bottom-up, purely biochemical, physical explanations can't capture everything that's going on in living systems. It was an anomaly, a strange edge case, or so I thought. Recently, though, I've bumped into the work of Dr. Michael Levin's newts, and the edge case became a revolution. Dr. Michael Levin runs a lab at Tufts University, and over the past decade, his work has produced some of the most philosophically significant findings in the history of biology. I'm going to describe a few of them to you, and then I want you to sit with how strange they are before we try to explain them. Experiment 1, the newt kidney. Levin's team introduced genetic mutations into newt kidney cells that made them significantly larger than normal. The kidney contains structures called tubules, and inside those tubules there's an empty cavity called a lumen, a hollow space through which blood is filtered. The obvious expectation was bigger cells, smaller lumen, cells crowding out the space, a predictable mechanical consequence of size. So when you introduce this mutation, the expectation is the lumen is basically choked out. That's what they expected, but that's not what happened. Instead, the mutated cells changed their shape altogether and on their own. They rearranged. Some of them even wrapped around themselves entirely. They altered the expression of their own DNA, the very genome that had been mutated, in ways that compensated for the mutation, and the lumen was preserved. The cells found a novel solution to a novel problem, a solution that critically they had never encountered before. Natural selection couldn't have trained them on this. No ancestral kidney had faced this specific perturbation. And yet, they found their way home. Experiment 2, scrambled embryos. Developmental biologists have found that when you violently disrupt the starting conditions of an embryo, scrambling cells, removing sections, transplanting organs to the wrong locations even, the organism still, in a striking number of cases, converges on its correct final form. These are actually novel, historically unprecedented disruptions, and the system navigates toward a target that none of its individual components had access to.
The very first problem that the collective has to solve is to get aligned towards a specific journey in anatomical space. And here's what I mean by that. When you look at an early embryo, so here's an embryonic blastodisc, there might be, let's say, 100,000 cells. We look at this and we say, oh, there's an embryo. What are you counting when you say there's one embryo? What is there one of? Because actually there's 100,000 cells, and within each one of those there are organelles and chemicals and so on. What are you actually counting? What you're actually counting is alignment. You are counting the fact that all of these cells, under normal circumstances, all of these cells are committed to the same story, to the same model of where in anatomical space they are going to go. Anatomical space is basically the space of all possible geometric configurations of the body, and all of these cells are going to collaborate on building one particular structure because they have all bought into the same story about where they're going to go. I said under normal circumstances because what you can do, and I used to do this in duck embryos as a grad student, you can make little scratches in this blastoderm, and every one of these little islands that's formed, until it heals up, it doesn't know about the existence of the others, and so they form their own embryo. and then eventually you get twins and triplets and whatever. So the number of individuals in this embryo is not set by the genetics. It is not obvious. It is not determined up front. They can self-organize by all aligning towards different aspects of that story, and they will all complete the journey on their own.
Experiment 3, the bioelectrical code. Levin's lab has also found that you can manipulate the body's bioelectric fields, which are the patterns of electrical charge across tissues, to radically redirect development itself. You see, by modulating these fields in flatworms, they were actually able to induce decapitated worms to regrow heads from different species entirely. I want you to pause and think about what that means. The genome doesn't just change, the DNA was actually the same, but the electrical field, which is merely an informational layer that sits above the genome, told the cells what to build, and then they went off and built it. Now, how do we explain all these anomalous findings? The most common move is to say conditional genetics. Maybe the genome encodes meta rules, like if the lumen integrity is compromised, express genes that restore it. Evolution has had 1 billion years, more than 1 billion years, to write these rules. Maybe it's just a very sophisticated program. This answer could be satisfying for some. I used to find it satisfying myself, but I don't anymore. And here's the problem. A conditional rule like, quote, restore the lumen when compromised, requires the system to recognize when the lumen is compromised, and across any number of novel configurations it has never seen. That recognition, is not a physical state. It's an abstract specification. It's a category. The lumen isn't compromised in one fixed way. It can be compromised in infinitely many ways because the cells are too large, because the cells are missing, because the pressure is wrong, because a toxin had disrupted the signaling. For the rule to work across all those cases, the system needs to represent the concept of lumen integrity as a category, not as a specific physical template. The thing is, you can't encode abstract categorical recognition in bottom-up chemistry. You can encode responses to specific molecular triggers, but the ability to recognize novel instantiations of the same abstract goal, that requires a goal to exist as something the system is oriented towards, not just triggered by. And this is what Levin calls an attractor state in morphospace, a region of biological possibility that the system is constantly trying to navigate toward, not because it's being pushed from below, but because it's being pulled from above. And this distinction, this push from below versus pull from above, is philosophically everything. Here's where I want to bring in something that most science communicators never touch, ancient philosophy. And I'm not doing this because it's charming or historical, but because I think it actually has ideas and it's got something right that we've spent over 400 years trying to explain away. Let's go to Aristotle. He believed that every event, every single thing that happens, has 4 causes. 4. The first is the material cause, what something is made out of, the bricks of a house, for example. The second is the efficient cause, the agent that brings it into being, the brick layer. The third is the formal cause, the pattern or form it takes. Think of it like the blueprint of the house. And the final cause is the purpose it's oriented toward, what it's for. In this case, a house, it's to house people. It's to give people a home. The scientific revolution basically told Aristotle to take his last 2 causes and go home. Formal and final causation were thrown at as mysticism. Physics and chemistry would deal only in material and efficient causes, stuff hitting stuff, and that's all you need. And for a long time, that looked like a very good trade. We got Newton, Maxwell, Einstein. But then we got Levin's newts, and the trade is starting to look more and more costly than advertised. Because what the newt's kidney cells are demonstrating is irreducibly final causation. There is a goal state, the intact lumen in this case, that the system is oriented toward and navigates back to, even through novel perturbations. You can't describe what's happening without reference to what the system is trying to accomplish. Let's use a different example to make this a little more vivid. Mozart's Requiem in D minor. You see, from a purely materialist standpoint, the Requiem is a collection of ink on paper, carbon-based molecules arranged in patterns that, when interpreted by trained musicians, produce vibrations in air that stimulate the auditory cortex and trigger neurochemical responses. And that description is not untrue, but it is catastrophically incomplete. It leaves out the one thing that makes the Requiem, the intention behind it, the passion narrative, the grief over mortality, the desire to move the listener toward an awareness of God's mercy and human finitude, Mozart's final cause, the purpose that organized the entire piece from beginning to end, the death of the Son of God. And crucially, that purpose preceded the music. The intention to write a piece mourning the death of the Son of God existed before any note was ever written. The final cause, in Aristotle's language, is prior to the material instantiation. No amount of molecular precision gets you to that, right? You can map every dopamine molecule that fires in your brain when you hear the lacrimosa. You will never derive from that map the fact that you are being invited to mourn the death of Christ. The meaning can't be found in matter. The matter serves the meaning. So if final causation is real, and if biological systems genuinely navigate toward goal states that aren't encoded in their chemistry, where does the goal come from? Let me give you a picture that's helped me. Think of a river cutting through a landscape. The water doesn't know where it's going. It doesn't have a map, and yet it reliably finds its way to the sea. Not because it's pushed to the sea, but because the landscape constrains its possibilities. The riverbed doesn't push the water forward, it shapes the space within which the water moves. And I think this is what Levin's bioelectric fields look like. They're not micromanaging instructions, they're informational scaffolds, the equivalent of the riverbed, constraints that limit cellular behavior toward anatomically coherent outcomes without dictating every molecular interaction. Consider a soap bubble. Soap bubble minimizes surface area. It doesn't decide to do this. There's no molecular committees, but the boundary conditions of surface tension and the pressure equilibrium admit only solutions near the minimum surface area attractor. The form emerges not because something pushed the molecules into it, but because the physical laws constrain the possibility space to solutions near that form. So what Levin is suggesting here is that something analogous, but far richer. It operates at the level of living systems. There are these attractors in biological morphospace, regions toward which development is pulled. And these attractors are informational rather than material. They're formal causes, not efficient ones. The genome is just the instrument. The attractor is the score. You see, evolution can select for architectures that are good at navigating toward attractors, but it cannot encode the attractors themselves. What is selected is not the final form, but the capacity to find the final form under novel conditions. And that's the trick. This is genuinely different. This is really, it is a genuinely different picture of how life works. This isn't some bottom-up instruction following. It's top-down constraint satisfaction. Not the genes tell the cells what to do, but rather the cells search a possibility space constrained by something the genes alone cannot contain. Let's push into some new territory here that might make you a little uncomfortable. I want you to do it carefully because I think the reasoning here is actually quite tight, and I'm not asking you to believe anything, I'm just asking you to follow the logic. You see, if biological systems are genuinely goal-directed, not as if goal-directed, but truly goal-directed, then the goals have to live somewhere. Where are they? They don't live in the DNA. We've established that. The DNA is just a repertoire of instruments. The goal is not in the instruments. And they can't live in any particular cell configuration either, because the whole point of the system is that it can reach the goal from any configuration. They can't purely be mathematical abstractions and played as heaven, because abstract mathematical objects don't pull physical systems toward them with any active force. Where do they live? Here's a possibility that I think deserves more serious consideration than it usually gets in scientific circles. Formal causes, goal states, attractors, the target that biological systems navigate towards, actually exist prior to the matter they organize. They precede their physical instantiation. Form, in this sense, is ontologically prior to matter, even if matter precedes form in time. Think about a circle. Every circle, whether drawn in sand or traced by a compass or modeled in a computer, converges on the same attractor, pi equals 3.14. The circle in your mind and the circle on your paper are both instances of the same formal reality. That formal reality isn't in the sand, it isn't in the paper, it exists as a constraint on what circles must be. So the question is, what sustains that formal reality? And here's where I want to invite you into something ancient. You see, the wisdom traditions, Hebrew, Greek, early Christian, they had a concept for the principle by which things cohere. It was a formal order that precedes matter toward which reality tends. The Hebrews called it hokmah, wisdom. It was present at the dawn of creation. It delighted in the works of God's hands, as the book of Proverbs describes it. Wisdom wasn't rules imposed from the outside. It wasn't an invisible hand micromanaging events, but it was a formal order that is somehow part of the structure of the world was always trying to reach. It's basically an attractor state written into the nature of things. Heraclitus, who lived 6 centuries before Christ, spoke of the logos. It was a principle of rational order that underlies all of reality, the one structure through which all things governed. Origen, writing 200 years after Christ, saw logos as the principle through which things can come to their full being, to what they were always meant to be. St. Augustine, who wrote in the 5th century, described his long, relentless, and restless journey toward faith. He said something that I keep returning to when I think about Levin's newts. Our heart is restless until it rests in thee. What Levin cells are doing, blindly, wetly, at the cellular level, is what everything that persists tries to do. It searches its space until it finds a home, a place of rest, a place of equilibrium, a place to preserve and to perpetuate itself ultimately. The attractor state of the universe is not just a physical feature, it is a formal feature. And as the ancients would say it, that form has a name. Now, let me be clear of what I'm not saying. I'm not saying science has proven God. I'm not saying that Levin experiments are a theological argument. I'm not asking you to abandon the billiard ball model for anything. It still works incredibly well within its domain. What I am saying is this, though. The game was always more complicated than the model suggests, and the more carefully we look at living systems, and even at math and at the structure of physical law itself, the more we find evidence of something that simple mechanical causation cannot account for. Final causes, goal states, attractors, formal order that precedes matter. These are not mystical intrusions from outside the scientific world. They are findings from within it, from developmental biology, from quantum mechanics, from medicine, from the philosophy of mathematics. And when you take those findings seriously and you follow them as far as they go, you find yourself arriving, perhaps unexpectedly and reluctantly, in a territory that ancient thinkers have already charted. You see, the billiard table was never just a billiard table. The bright dotted line tracing every particle's path, that clean, certain mechanical arc, was always just a simplification. It was a useful fiction. And the real picture, though, is far more richer. It's more purposeful, it's more oriented. It's more like a symphony than a game, actually. And the question of who composed it and why turns out not to be a question that science alone can frankly answer, but it may be a question that science, done honestly and without metaphysical prejudice, is slowly pointing us back toward asking. Thanks for watching. If this kind of thing interests you, the intersection of philosophy, theology, science, history, subscribe. There's a lot more where this came from. I'll see you in the next one.